Good morning and welcome back to our series in the book of Acts that's kind of looking at the design and purpose of the church as God intended when He created it and gave it its marching orders, which are our marching orders. So it's talking about us, not just the church. It includes us. And so today we're going to talk about the perfect church. And I'm not talking about us, all right, just be clear. And you can find the description of this perfect church if you have a Bible, Acts chapter 2, verse 42 to 47. That's what we're going to be looking at today. It is a shorter passage than what we covered last week, which was like almost an entire chapter. Because what you're going to see throughout the book of Acts, and it's kind of where I'm focusing most of our attention, are on these kind of like lenses through which it looks and talks about the church. And so several times in the book of Acts, it'll pause and kind of give you the state of the church at that moment, how things are going, and describe how the church was. And so at this point, we get this, this picture that is a pretty phenomenal picture. But to be clear, it wasn't perfect. We'll see in a few chapters, if not paragraphs, some of the flaws that will be found within the church, but yet it is likely that this church was at a high, like at the highest point. I mean, it had been a month or so since the resurrection, so that's still super fresh in their minds. It had been a week since Christ ascended into heaven and had given them their marching orders. So they just haven't had time, I guess, to let human nature kind of play a part. But there was still human nature involved. So it's not perfect, but this passage is choosing to talk about what they're doing right. It's not going to talk about, it's going to talk about what they're doing right. And so that's why it kind of comes across as a perfect church. So let me read the section for you. You can follow along, Acts chapter 2, verse 42 through 47. Let me begin. And it says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And all came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together, had all things in common, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." You can kind of see why I call it perfect, right? That's a pretty amazing description of a church. Now, we have a weird relationship with perfect. Typically, when something is perfect, we want to make excuses why it's perfect and what's really behind the scenes. I mean, it's the classic, when you go to your wife's high school reunion and you meet her ex-boyfriend who's like taller, bigger, stronger, and you're like, but you try to find something to justify why you're better and why, she did better choosing you than choosing him. That's not a true story. Maybe a little. I'm kidding. But you know what I mean? We have this weird relationship with things that are better than us. We tend to be critical of things that are better than us. It's actually weird. When you say perfect, it's like half the time it's sarcastic and half the time it's legitimate. Maybe you get a Christmas gift and you're like, it's perfect, meaning you love it. It really it's more than what you expected. It's great. It's everything you could have wanted. That's great. But usually when you say that's perfect, that means it's complete opposite. It's as disastrous as it could be. It's like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. It is that kind of version of perfect. And I wondered, I thought through it, how often I think we use the sarcastic version of perfect. If you were to say someone, oh, he's perfect, you don't mean that. What you're trying to say is that you really don't like the person, because they come across as arrogant or whatever it might be. There's this, I get these ads on my social media feed. I know they're all tailored to different people, but one of the ones I get is these AI-generated headshots. You know what I mean? So if you're in the business world and you have a resume or a business card or something like that, they'll take your photo and they'll make the perfect headshot of you. And they look really good, to be honest. And so I asked our Christian to create the perfect headshot of the perfect pastor, and this is what it came up with. So if you're new and you don't know who this is Bob Thune, who I hope he's okay with how much I kid with him about how I see, that is Superman, kind of Christopher Reeve version Superman. Either way, no, okay. But all right, so we said, make a perfect picture of me. What would I be perfected? And this is what it came up with. I love it because, it's got the spiritual wings coming out, and it's me if I made no bad decisions ever. You know what I mean? It looks like me. If I was disciplined in my workout and I didn't snack after 9 or things like that. If all it could be me. And so here's the question though. When I look at that picture, am I encouraged or am I discouraged? Because that's not me. Do I sit there and say, oh, this is what I could be? Or do I sit there and say, that's what I am not? That's kind of our relationship with perfect. You can take the picture down, even though if you want that picture later, just let me know. Actually, we were going to use Josh as the kind of the model for that picture, but when we asked AI to make a perfect picture of Josh, it was the exact same Josh that you see right now. He really can't get better. All right. So I say that because when we read this passage about this perfect church, oftentimes people immediately jump to why it can't be, why it wouldn't work. And that's not the point of the passage. The passage is here there's no criticism of this church in this passage. And honestly, sometimes when we critique something that is perfect or better than we are, it reveals something about us. Maybe an inadequacy or, a self-conscious, kind of thing in us that we just want to dismiss or make excuses for. This passage, this description of the church was meant to set a bar for what the church can be. And it kind of describes what this church would look like. In Acts chapter 2, verse 42, it says, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and prayers. Now, just kind of give you answer a question that you may ask or may not have asked. It's an interesting way of describing all these things because it uses a definite article in front of each of the words. So it's the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, the prayers. We don't often talk like that. What it's basically saying, it's describing what you would consider like the regular and formal practices of the church. So the breaking of bread is probably the easiest one to understand. Breaking of bread could just mean eating, kind of. But when it says the breaking of bread, it means communion. And so when it talks about, prayers and things, so it's talking about the actual kind of like practices of the church that it does when it gathers together. And so the first of those things, the apostles' teaching, it doesn't, like I said, just use one word, but those one words are pretty interesting. It says it devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. It didn't say God's word. And we get an example of that when just a few paragraphs earlier, when we hear Peter give his whole speech, kind of unpacking passages from Joel and Psalms and teaching the people what they mean. This is what they were talking about. And what I find neat about it, and this is that it affirms three things just by saying they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. One, it affirms the Old Testament because that's what the apostles taught from. You know, they would go through that. That was their Bible at the time. There was no New Testament at this point. And so it affirms the Old Testament because that's what they would teach. It also affirms the New Testament because if you're wondering what the New Testament is, it is the apostles' teaching. It's the apostles' teaching that has been recorded and kept, and now we have it. And so they are devoted themselves to that as well. And it affirms the role of a preacher like me to do what I do. The reason I don't come up here and just read text to you is because this is what they did too. They would read a text and then explain it and kind of help people understand what it means. And so it affirms all these things. Second thing that they were devoted to was this thing called the fellowship, which is this famous word called koinonia. How many of you guys know that word, koinonia? All right. It was huge in the 90s. If we had built our coffee shop, our new coffee shop in the 90s, we would have called it the Koinonia Cafe. That's, everyone was using the word. It was like the cool thing. Not anymore. It's not on our list. So either way, point being, but it's a word that means fellowship, but it means more than that. It's kind of like the fellowship of God's people. It's this unity, this harmony, this idea of fellowship that seems to be reserved for church and God's people. And like I said, it just uses the word, so I don't want to say too much on it, but we'll see how important this fellowship is to the rest of the church in a second. It's key. It's the glue for this description of the perfect church. Next, it goes on to the breaking of bread, and I'm going to add "and the prayers" to that because this is likely talking about their gathering of worship. The breaking of bread, what they did, taking communion together. And the prayers would be the kind of prayers that we're talking about that you would all know, and we would do, and we would recite or speak in common. And I know nowadays we put music to them, but I hope that our worship is in the spirit of prayer when you do worship, but it's that like saying these things together in unison, united, those would be considered the prayers. And so the church would gather, break bread, take communion, and then they would offer up prayers in unison, and that is still very much what we do today. Now, what's interesting is that these are the things that are mentioned that they devoted themselves to, and there's something missing in this. And it's what was happening, what we'll see in one single verse, what's happening still. All the signs and wonders and miracles that were happening are not mentioned in what they were devoted themselves to. And I find that intriguing because when Jesus started his ministry, that is why people came. That is what they wanted to see. That was what they were devoted to. They wanted to see the cool stuff. Oh, Jesus can do this and Jesus can do that. And like I said, the apostles were still able to do these things, but yet the church now doesn't meet for that reason. Now they meet for teaching. They want to know the truth, for fellowship, for breaking of bread, and for the prayers. But in the early Jesus ministry, this is from John chapter 6, verse 2, it says, large crowds were following him because they saw signs that he was doing on the sick. So, they wanted to see the wonders. And my guess is at this point, either two things. One is either once you've seen the resurrection, there's no miracle that's really that impressive anymore. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, that's, yeah, but, that did you come back from the dead? That kind of thing. It's pretty cool that you don't feel bad anymore or that you can walk again. But once you've seen someone rise from the dead, maybe it's like you're over it. Or, this is, I think, more likely, they had matured and realized that the things that really make a difference in people's lives are the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayers together. That unity, that church. And it was no longer about, seeing those neat little things. So the result of this devotion that they have is in Acts 2:43, and it says, "And awe came upon every soul." So they are riding on high, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. So like I said, clearly this is a high point for the church. Everything seems to be going well. One of those signs and wonders we'll look at next chapter where Peter heals a lame beggar. We'll look at that next chapter. But it's one of the examples of the signs and wonders that were happening. But what's interesting is when it does happen, they pull that guy right into the church. It says, Acts 3:7-8 said they took him by the right hand, raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles were made strong, and leaping up, he stood up, began to walk, and entered the temple with them, walking and leaping and praising God. And so he just joins this group of people who are all kind of in that place of praise and gratefulness. So like I said, this is kind of an amplified version of what the church is now. So it's not like these things have ceased to exist. They still exist, but when God starts things, it's always kind of amplified. And so this is definitely an amplified version of it, but I say that because you still see those elements in us today. At least I hope you do. And one of the things that, does God still move and do signs and wonders? I would encourage you, if you have never come to one of our prayer meetings, come. We meet on Tuesday. We have a great group of people who pray, and you will see God answer those prayers. The challenge most of us have is if you're only looking at one little spot and say, God, I want you to move. He can be moving all around you, and you're just looking at that one little spot and you're saying, I don't see you. I don't see you moving. One of the best ways to see God move is to be in a fellowship like this where you can see, and the reality is does he answer every prayer? No, he does not answer the way we would want him to answer them. No, he doesn't answer every prayer the way he would want him to answer them, but sometimes he does. And if he answers one prayer, he's listening to all your prayers. And that's kind of what we operate. That's all you really need to see that he is behind it all. So this, you've got this amplified picture of this amazing church. And at this point, the passage goes to a level that I think that is where we begin to go, what? Can this even be? Acts chapter 2, 45, 46, and they said they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts. They had everything in common. They were meeting daily, and they were selling selling their possessions in order to meet the needs of the people in their church. That's what's happening. Now, the reason I kind of talked about the whole critique thing at the very beginning is when I was studying for this passage, almost every commentary I read was saying, this is not communism. It's like one of the first things they said, this is not socialism. And they're right, it isn't. There's no authority that requires people to, they were doing it freely. They were doing it on their own because they wanted to. Their own free will. They were selling their things to give to other people. It's meeting the needs of people. It's not kind of trying to even the playing field. You know what I mean? It's not trying to say everybody gets the same amount. It was just making sure that nobody's needs were going unmet. So it's very different. But like I said, you don't want to sit there and say what it's not. You want to say what it is. And because what's interesting to me is, as radical as this picture sounds, you know this. This is what a family does. This is how a family operates. When you think about your own family, you don't think about like, well, this is my house, not your house. You think this is our house, the family, your kids, mom, dad, everyone who's in that family. You share your possessions. One person works to provide for the other. You don't sit there and say, pull your weight to a 5-year-old. You know what I mean? You just take care of them. You meet their needs. You see, obviously you see each other every day. Life just that's how you operate. You see each other. You enjoy each other's company. Maybe you eat a meal every night together. Whatever it is that you do, this is a very normal picture of a family. And so what I mean earlier, why that fellowship is the key and the glue for this passage, is it makes a lot more sense when you read this passage and see that this church, this fellowship, saw themselves as a family. And so all of it is what families just do. Now, the amazing part, that this family was over 3,000 people. I mean, I think we sit there and say, oh, I get that with a family of 5 or 4 or, something like that. When you get to about 200, it's a little harder. Well, just imagine 3,000 operating that closely as a family would operate. It seems like an unreachable bar. I was thinking, if I were to sit there and, put a bar up near the top of the roof and say, jump over it, you'd be like, can't be done, Mike. What are you doing? Impossible. How in the world? Well, you know what the highest bar someone has ever cleared? 20 feet, 7 inches. Now, they had a pole, but that's it. But if I were to sit there and say, okay, can you clear a 20-foot pole? You'd be, no way. But then when you see someone actually do it, you're like, oh, maybe there is a way. Now, I'm not saying I can or you can do that, but the reality is that I think sometimes we sell ourselves far shorter than we should. And this is what this passage is kind of trying to say, is that there's a church that did it. Yes, it's the world record. And it's likely you're not going to beat the world record. But someone has reached this point, and so you can't just sit there and say it's impossible. It can't be done. The challenge is in our world today, when you get this picture of like perfection, the challenge is that instead of seeing it as something to aspire to rise to pursue, people then, when they realize they may not reach it, they flip a switch and they switch to, I'm going to pretend I have. I'm going to fake it. I'm going to act like it, even though I'm not there. This is a quote from St. Augustine. It says, if thou shouldst say, it is enough, I have reached perfection, all is lost, since it is the function of perfection to make one know one's imperfections. Truth be told, if you pursue a goal, you realize how short you are falling from it. It should show you the things that aren't going. So when you pretend that you are there, then you actually undermine the pursuit. You stop pursuing the goal when you pretend you've already reached it. One of the craziest things, and maybe it's because I'm not a runner. I love to swim, I love to bike, but God gave me size 14 feet, and so It's like running in like flippers, I don't run. And so, either way, point being is, I know that the marathon is kind of considered the gold standard of physical fitness. Like that's a lot of people out there, they want to achieve that goal. I want to say I was able to run a marathon. Not me, people. You know what I mean? So there's this idea, and when you run a marathon, except for very few, you're not trying to win. You know what I mean? It's a sea of people at the beginning who just kind of go out, and they let the ones who might win kind of go early and first so that they're not, having to run into the crowds. But most of the people, 99% of the people who are in that race just want to finish. That's the goal, right? Because they can say, I trained hard enough, I worked hard enough, I prepared, and I did it. I finished. I ran the marathon. I can sit there and mark that off on my life goals of accomplishments that I have achieved. But there's this weird thing, is that there are these people out there, and there's probably more than we know of, who cheat during marathons. They cut corners or they take shortcuts. And the only time they really get caught is if they cheat too much and they come in third place or they're way ahead of what anyone expected of them. And then the people start to look at, they're like, did we see you at this part of the race, kind of thing, and nowadays they have these chips that I think you run with to make it harder to cheat. But it blew my mind to think that if the goal of this thing is to finish, to actually have worked hard enough to be able to do it, cheating just makes it, you were not able. It kind of undermines why even do it if you feel like you have to cheat. And I'm going to say, guys, the church is in this same boat where the church, there is a goal that we want to reach, a church that we want to be. And if we fake it, we cheat, what are we doing? What's the point of that? I would honestly go as far as to say that churches that have pretended to be better than they are, churches that have pretended to be perfect, are the churches that have done the most damage in our world. People get hurt, chewed up, spit out, when they see behind the curtain, so to speak, and they see what it really is, it devastates them and oftentimes turns them off. It does the harm where they never go to another church again. You actually get the exact opposite of what you're striving for. The unfortunate reality is that some react to perfection by rejecting it. Some react to it by pretending and faking it. And not enough of us react by pursuing it and trying to be what it calls us to be. And so, but that doesn't make the goal useless. It's actually a very good goal. This is a Charles Spurgeon quote. It says, the fact that perfection is beyond our reach should not diminish the fervor of our desire after it. This is the sense that the fact that this church existed should motivate us to be a better church. It should motivate us to be the church that, like you said, if you're going to train for a marathon, the first day out, you're going to realize how short you've fallen, and you say, okay, all right, I can only run 2 miles. All right, so let's work on that. And you give grace and you keep working towards it. That's the kind of church where if you're working towards perfection, you are gracious towards your imperfection. And you're moving to make it just to improve in those areas, not to condemn those areas. I always find that if you're going to use perfect as a measuring stick, it's a really bad measuring stick because you're always going to fall short. But what this passage does, and I love it, is that it gives us a different measuring stick, a better one. Acts chapter 2, verse 46 to 47, it says, "And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." Instead of using kind of a bar, now it uses kind of a heart. And it kind of says the spirit of this church was that they were glad, grateful, they were generous, they were praising God. And those are things that even if you're not yet there, you can still be. Hear what I'm saying? You can still be a person who is grateful and glad and generous and in awe of God. No matter where you're starting, no matter how far. And honestly, those are the things that motivate you, keep you. That's kind of the exercise. That's what's making you better day by day. And what's interesting is it talks about how you know whether you are these things or not. But you know who else also sees this and knows this? Everyone who looks at you. You know, it's really hard to fake your heart, to fake the gladness, the joy, the joy. You could, but it's hard. And people know you long enough, they know it. And that's interesting is this church, the outsiders, this is their witness. Their witness was just enjoying the fellowship that God had given them. And people were seeing that, curious, and they were coming and learning why, and they were being saved. So the question we have, are we this church? No, we're not this church. But are we grateful? Are we generous? Do others in our community see something different, special here? I think those are the questions that we should be asking. Are we pursuing to be the church that God intended us to be? That's the question. Let's pray. Lord Father, thank you so much for this the challenges that we will face as we seek to just be better than what we are today. Not to judge what we are today, but just to always sit there and see that there is a bar for which you want us to strive for and reach for. Lord, I ask that you would make us the place where grateful hearts, generous hearts, kind hearts are prevalent. Help us to see the things that we need to see in order to grow in our fellowship. May our teaching be faithful. May our worship be true. I ask, Lord, that you would just give us the strength and power we need to keep going, keep striving, and, Lord, to enjoy it while we do. We thank you for that honor and privilege, Lord. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.